In Peru, truckers extend their strike despite preliminary agreements reached with the national government. Authorities call for calm in the midst of violent protests and looting. And the Kremlin insists on having a debate at the United Nations Security Council to unveil Western falsehoods about alleged civilian killings in Bucha. President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that all COVID-19 pandemic legal restrictions will end at midnight, declaring it was time to resume growing the economy. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, from the teleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. And now we begin. In Peru, the preliminary agreement reached between the government and the transportation companies did not meet the expectations of the transportation service providers, and protests have escalated. The government of Pedro Castillo ordered the exoneration of the excise tax on 84 and 890 octane gasoline, a measure that collective carriers workers consider insufficient. This measure responds to only the demands included in the list of demands that the transport union demands that put an end to the protest. For this reason, the demonstrations proliferated and spread throughout the regions where the highways remain blocked and in some cases have attacked government facilities. In Colombia, the electoral campaign of the presidential formula for the historical pact coalition, Gustavo Petro and Francia Márquez, is advancing in the run-up to the elections on May 29th. The couple for the historical pact began a national tour called the Four Cardinal Points on Friday. The candidates arrived this Sunday in Tumaco in the department of Nariño, where the first stage of the campaign activities culminated. In all these places, Petro and Márquez presented their government plan and listened to the proposals of the inhabitants with whom they ratified their commitment to change.
We will be together with Franks explaining the government program, talking to you, talking about how to make Colombia a world power of life.
The vice presidential candidate for Equipo Colombia, Rodrigo Lara Sánchez, traveled to the streets of Neiva, Florencia, and Bogotá as part of the presidential campaign. Rodrigo Lara met with traders, representatives of the health sector, young people, small entrepreneurs, farmers, and citizens. Among his proposals, he spoke of labor contracts for health personnel, the decentralization of state processes, the strengthening of natural tourism, the protagonism of the regions in the national government, security and protection of the lives of cyclists.
This splendid week that began with the registration of our political project with the registry office is coming to an end, and we are very happy to be able to begin our tour of Colombia. We were in the department of Huila, my homeland, then we went to the department of Caquetá, and finally we finished our tour here in Bogotá. We were able to engage in dialogue with young people, with the health sector that has so many expectations after 2 years of suffering the pandemic. We were also able to share with the entrepreneurs, with the agro-industrial sector, and of course, look at the environmental issue, so important, especially on the issue of deforestation and risk as it exists in the department of Caquetá. We finished here in Bogotá with an activity that we like, doing exercise, and we hope to continue next week touring the country.
And now we move on to other topics. Hundreds of women took to the streets to demand respect for their rights this Sunday in Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, on the National Women's Movement Day. The march was attended by various trade unions and popular and feminist organizations demanding the right to a life without violence. During the sit-in, the demonstrators denounced the systematic violence against women and girls, including sexual harassment, femicide, rape, and beatings. The rally was held under the slogan, "Haitian women and feminists will not give up the struggle to build a country based on the respect of the right to live, and full dignity." On Monday, Cuba's health ministry announced the easing of COVID-19 restrictions on travelers arriving from abroad, as the Caribbean nation will no longer request a negative PCR test or a vaccination certificate as mandatory for travelers entering the country. According to Cuba's health officials, this decision considers the international and national epidemiological situation and the levels of immunization achieved against the coronavirus. The top official of epidemiology, Director Francisco Duran, announced that the new policy will take effect as of Wednesday. However, authorities will continue to carry out random tests at the island's entry points and maintain the mandatory use of masks. The measure is part of the relaxation in the requirements for tourists that Cuba has been taking since the end of 2021. On November 15, 2021, this country stopped requiring travelers to be quarantined after overcoming several months of rising infections. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. The Russian government on Monday rejected all accusations for the alleged massacre committed by Russian troops in the Ukrainian town of Bucha. Russian Foreign Affairs Minister Sergei Lavrov branded the situation created around the Ukrainian city of Bucha as a slander and said it was a direct threat to international security. In that regard, he denounced that a staging was prepared there, and that is what is being spread through all news outlets and social media by the Ukrainian representatives and their Western sponsors, saying the images were recorded after the Russian troops had left the place. Lavrov also said that Russia sees such provocations as a direct threat to world peace and security, and therefore called for an urgent meeting for the United Nations Security Council.
Demand an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council on this issue. We see such provocation as a direct threat to international peace and security.
In this regard, the Russian foreign minister said such actions are used by the West and Ukraine as part of their anti-Russian propaganda.
The Russian military completely withdrew from this city on March 30th. On March 31st, the mayor of the city of Bucha solemnly said that everything was in order for him. 2 more days later, we saw how the same staging was organized on the streets, which they are now trying to use for anti-Russian purpose.
And the Serbian president, Aleksandar Vučić, assured that his country will continue to maintain friendly bilateral relations with Russia, preserving neutrality in relation to military alliances. This is what he said after winning the first round of the presidential elections held on Sunday. The president did not hesitate to reaffirm that the traditional friendships between the two countries must not be lost. He also stressed the impact of the situation in Ukraine and said that it was the cause of strong polarization in the region. Vučić won the presidential election with more than 60% of the vote. And the German Federal Finance Minister Christian Lindner said in an interview published in the national media that his country is being affected by the situation in Ukraine. Now they are compelled to pay for imported energy above the usual price. He admitted that the government cannot replace this loss of prosperity and can only soften the larger impacts. He acknowledged that the end of Russian hydrocarbons supplies will have noticeable and serious effects for his country. The repercussions, he said, go beyond money because it will affect the physical viability of energy for citizens. And the government of Greece reported the cancellation of the entire debt acquired with the International Monetary Fund in May 2010. The National Finance Minister, Christos Saidkouras, announced on Monday, April 4th, that his nation has completed the payment of its debt with the IMF's acquired in May 2010, when Greece turned to the fund for financial support. The head of finance department described this as a very positive event, the result of the current government's economic policy. And at the same time, it sends a signal of economic stability and it saves the public purse, 230 million euros. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. On Monday, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that all COVID-19 pandemic legal restrictions will end at midnight, declaring it was time to resume growing the economy. Ramaphosa said his country, which is the hardest hit in the continent, has seen death rates plunge from an average daily high of 420 in July last year to just 12 in the past week. During a televised address, the South African president said his government decided to terminate the national state of disaster with effect from midnight tonight, which has been in place since March 15, 2020. However, some transitional measures such as mask wearing in indoor spaces will remain in place for the next 30 days.
Since the requirement for a national state of disaster to be declared in terms of the Disaster Management Act are no longer met, Cabinet has decided to terminate the national state of disaster with effect from midnight tonight. This means that travelers entering South Africa will need to show proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test not older than 72 hours. If a traveler does not submit a vaccine certificate or proof of a negative COVID-19 test, they will be required to do an antigen test on arrival.
In China, nearly 40,000 doctors from different areas of the country have been sent to Shanghai to help contain the current coronavirus outbreak. The National Health Commission reported that more than 11,000 doctors have taken on the responsibility of working at temporary hospital facilities, and more than 23,000 medical workers are responsible for collecting DNA samples. In the last 24 hours, the Shanghai region has reported 425 cases of local transmission of COVID-19. Meanwhile, authorities will continue to implement strict lockdowns until further notice. In Kenya, drivers queue for hours as the country reels from fuel shortages. Drivers wait at petrol stations in Kisumu in western Kenya amid another day of major fuel shortages, with hours-long queues and strict rationing at petrol stations as pumps across the country ran dry. The government blamed for the snaking lines at browsers that worsened over the weekend. Oil dealers said they were owed outstanding subsidized payments from the state. The Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority said that the government was working to settle all areas owed to the dealers. But the government blamed hoarders for the shortfall and insisted it had sufficient reserves to supply the East African nation. According to a source, the crunch began last week in Kenya's west following a row between oil marketing companies and the government over subsidized payments.
Carry the fuel tank of my bike because I could not push my bike to this place because of the distance. When I carry a jerry can, they don't sell to us, saying we are going to sell the fuel. So I have decided to remove the tank and walk with it. And if I don't get fuel, I won't return home because my children won't have anything for food. I then won't let me leave home without giving them food.
And Iran criticizes new U.S. sanctions, which have previously ended progress in Vienna. Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian said his country was ready to sign an agreement. He said that during a telephone conversation with his Omani counterpart, Badr al-Buzaid, in which he assured that they were going to sign an agreement reached in Vienna, but Washington's decision and attitude was he described as extravagant sabotage that would have been a positive achievement for all the parties. Iran and the 4+1 group have held 8 rounds of negotiations in Vienna since April 2021 with the aim of reviving the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But the United States, which is intervening informally, having withdrawn unilaterally in 2018, has prevented positive progress from being consolidated. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.